Have you ever heard a voice so pure, it seemed to rise above pain itself, a voice born not in comfort, but in hunger, rain, and forgotten corners of a city? This is the story of Miguel Santos, a 15-year-old boy from the crowded streets of Manila, whose voice carried the ache of 1,000 sleepless nights. He had no stage, no microphone, no fancy clothes, only a small tin can that echoed with the sound of spare coins and dreams. Beside him, life was a silent witness. His younger sister, Laura, just 8 years old, would often sit on a broken step nearby, clutching an old stuffed toy, their mother's last gift before she passed. Lara's eyes carried both pride and fear, pride for her brother's courage, fear of what tomorrow might bring. And somewhere far away, across oceans and bright lights, destiny was quietly waiting, on a stage called International Got Talent, IGT, where thousands came chasing fame, but only a few arrived carrying truth. How does a boy with nothing but a cracked guitar and a trembling voice end up standing before Simon Cowell himself? How does pain turn into music so powerful that it could silence a crowd and make the harshest critic wipe away a tear? As the world rushes forward, chasing success and spotlight, Miguel's story reminds us that sometimes, the greatest voices are not heard in studios or arenas, they echo from alleyways, from those who sing not for applause, but for survival. This is not a story of talent alone. It's a story of love, loss, and the kind of faith that grows in darkness. It's about a brother who sang for his sister, and in doing so, touched millions. Before the lights, before the fame, before the tears, there was just a boy, a song, and a dream strong enough to move the world. Miguel Santos was not like other 15-year-olds. While most boys his age were in classrooms, laughing with friends, or scrolling through phones, Miguel's mornings began beneath the rusted awning of a small bakery in the heart of Manila. He'd wake before sunrise, his body sore from the concrete floor, his first thought not of breakfast, but of survival. He carried with him a small guitar, its wood cracked, its strings uneven, yet it was his most precious belonging. He had found it in a garbage pile 2 years ago, cleaned it, and learned to make it sing. Every chord carried a story, every note a memory. Music was his only escape from the weight of poverty, from the memories of his mother's voice fading away in a hospital room they couldn't afford. Miguel's father, once a fisherman, had disappeared after the typhoon took their home. Since then, Miguel had taken the role of both brother and protector to little Lara. She was the reason he smiled even when hunger pressed against his ribs. Every coin he earned from singing went to buy her rice, or sometimes, a piece of bread they'd share under a flickering streetlight. Despite everything, Miguel wasn't bitter. He carried a quiet gentleness, the kind that made strangers stop and listen. His eyes always seemed to be searching the sky, as if asking the stars when his mother would hear his songs again. Every evening, after the rush of the city slowed, he'd hum softly to himself, his voice echoing through the narrow alleyways. He wasn't chasing fame, only peace. Yet, deep inside, there was a hidden spark, a longing to be seen, to be heard beyond the streets that had become his stage. Miguel's life was simple, repetitive, yet filled with small moments of grace, sharing laughter with Lara over leftover bread, watching sunsets paint hope across the polluted sky, and whispering promises to his mother's photograph that one day, his voice would change their fate. He didn't know how, or when. But he believed that music, the only thing he truly owned, could one day open a door to a life beyond the streets. There came a time when even Miguel's songs could no longer drown out the noise of reality. The city that once echoed his music began to turn cold. Fewer people stopped to listen, fewer coins dropped into his tin can. The bakery where he slept shut down, and the alley that had once been their home became another construction site. For the first time, Miguel felt something he had always tried to avoid, hopelessness. Lara had grown weaker, her small frame often shivered at night. She had caught a fever that wouldn't go away, and the cheap medicine from the corner stall did little to help. Miguel watched helplessly as her bright eyes dimmed, and he realized how powerless he truly was. He blamed himself in quiet moments. He thought of all the nights he spent singing instead of finding better work, all the times he believed that his voice could somehow save them. The streets, once his open stage, now felt like a cage closing in. The world moved on, cars rushed, people hurried, and in their rush, no one noticed the boy sitting by the lamppost with a guitar heavier than his heart. Each note he sang began to tremble with pain. Music, once his escape, now became a reminder of everything he couldn't fix. He missed his mother more than ever, her soft hands, her lullabies, her faith that life would get better. He wished she were there to tell him what to do, to give him strength when he had none left. One evening, as rain poured over the city, Miguel sat under a torn umbrella with Lara asleep beside him. Her breathing was weak, her tiny fingers clinging to his arm. He looked at her and realized, this was the breaking point. He couldn't let her fade away like their mother. Something had to change. That night, beneath the sound of thunder and tears, Miguel made a silent promise. He would take his voice beyond these streets. He would sing not just for coins, but for a chance, no matter how impossible it seemed, to save the only family he had left. Fate often arrives quietly, not in grand gestures, but in moments that seem ordinary until they change everything. For Miguel, it began with a stranger holding a camera. One morning, as the sun burned through the Manila haze, Miguel stood at his usual spot near a busy intersection. His guitar rested against his chest, his voice fragile but full of soul. He sang an old Tagalog song, one his mother used to hum while cooking rice, and though the crowd barely noticed, one man did. He was a tourist, touched by the boy's sincerity. Without saying a word, he recorded Miguel's performance and later uploaded it online with the caption, "The voice of an angel, found on the streets of Manila." Days passed, and Miguel knew nothing of it. But the video began to spread like wildfire. People around the world were moved by the raw emotion in his voice. Comments poured in, tears, prayers, and words of admiration. Among the millions who watched was a producer from International Got Talent, IGT, who couldn't forget the boy's trembling yet heavenly tone. Weeks later, Miguel was approached by a woman in a simple dress near the marketplace. She introduced herself as a representative from IGT's Asia auditions. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke, who would invite a street singer to an international stage? But when she showed him the video, now with millions of views, Miguel's hands shook. For the first time, he saw himself not as a street boy, but as someone the world wanted to hear. That night, he ran home to Lara with tears in his eyes. She smiled faintly, her weak body wrapped in a blanket, whispering that their mother must be watching from heaven. Miguel held her hand and promised that no matter how far he had to go, he would sing for both of them, and for every child who had ever felt unseen. It was the moment everything changed. A voice born in silence was now being called to the world's biggest stage. Destiny had finally heard his song. The journey from the streets of Manila to the shining stage of International Got Talent was not a fairy tale, it was a storm Miguel had to walk through barefoot. When he boarded the airplane for the first time, his heart pounded harder than any rhythm he had ever played. Everything felt unreal, the lights, the cameras, the luxury of a hotel room, the endless rehearsals. But beneath the wonder, there was fear, a deep, haunting fear that he didn't belong. Every contestant around him wore fine clothes, spoke fluent English, and carried confidence like armor. Miguel, with his second-hand shoes and trembling hands, felt small, a street boy standing among stars. Each night, he would call Lara through a borrowed phone. Her voice grew weaker, but her words steadied him. She reminded him of why he sang, not for fame, not for money, but for love. "Sing for us, Kuya," she would whisper. And he would close his eyes, remembering the sound of Manila rain, the smell of bread from the bakery, and the way their mother used to hum before sleeping. Rehearsals were grueling. His nerves often got the better of him, his voice cracked, his timing slipped. There were moments he almost gave up, moments when he stood backstage, staring at the exit door, ready to leave everything behind. But each time, he remembered Lara's smile, fragile yet full of hope. That memory became his strength. He learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid, it was about singing through the fear. Each mistake became a lesson, each tear a quiet vow to do better. Slowly, he began to find his rhythm again, not just in music, but in faith. Miguel discovered that his voice wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real, raw and full of the cracks that came from surviving. The audience didn't need a polished star. They needed a story, a soul. By the time his name was called for the live audition, Miguel had changed. He was no longer just the boy from the streets. He had become something greater, a symbol of every dreamer who dared to rise from the dust and sing. When Miguel stepped off that grand stage, the lights behind him dimming and the roar of the audience echoing in his ears, he didn't feel like a star, he felt like a son, a brother, and a survivor who had finally been heard. Simon Cowell's tears, the golden confetti, the standing ovation, all of it felt like a dream. But deep inside, Miguel knew the true miracle wasn't the applause. It was that his song had reached hearts far beyond what he could see. News of his performance traveled back to the streets of Manila. People who once passed him by without a glance now gathered around their small televisions, watching the boy who had once sung for coins now sing for the world. Even Lara, lying in a hospital bed, smiled through her tears as she watched her brother's face light up the screen. In that moment, she wasn't just proud, she was healed in spirit, knowing her brother's voice had given meaning to their pain. But Miguel's story didn't end with fame. He returned home months later, still humble, still carrying his old guitar. He began using his platform to help children who lived as he once had, kids with dreams trapped behind hunger and fear. He built small music programs, taught them songs, and told them that even when the world seems deaf, they must never stop singing. Through his journey, Miguel learned that success is not measured by trophies or lights, but by the lives we touch along the way. His mother's words echoed in his heart, that pain, when carried with faith, becomes the purest form of art. And so, his music became more than melody, it became a prayer, a bridge between struggle and hope. Miguel's story reminds us all that sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the quietest places, from those who have known loss, hunger, and loneliness. Because when they sing, they don't just perform, they heal. In the end, the boy who once sang for survival taught the world something far greater. That even in the darkest corners, a single voice, pure and honest, can still reach heaven.